Okay, so here we go. We said don't be a dumb bear.
Hmm.
Don't be a dumb bear. And we said selling a naked call is just not smart because you would be taking unlimited risk. And so we said what you might want to consider doing is offsetting your obligation to sell the stock at 230 with a choice to buy at 245.
Hmm.
Options are all about floors and ceilings. All the action takes place between the strikes. We said there are 8 test questions potentially about a spread. And I call it don't hate the 8. Don't hate the 8. You want to have a process. You can do it any way you want as long as you come with the answer. We said one potential test question about advanced option strategies is identifying the strategy itself. Are you looking at a condor, a flamingo, a straddle, a combo, a spread? You got to be able to tell me this is a spread. That alone is testable. A spread means we're spreading the difference. Spread means there's a buy and a sell of the same type of contract. So
Hmm.
this is a call spread. We said the next thing we got to be able to do on the test is identify whether it is a credit or a debit.
Yes.
I'm always a believer in firing up the T. The two biggest things I think for option success is, do you understand contract specifications? In other words, you're not fumbling around with a short put as an obligation to buy the stock.
Hmm.
Then can you track money? If you
Yeah.
could understand contract specification, you can track money. Now, if you're not going to do that, that's okay. Then you're just going to have to memorize a bunch of stuff, and we need to do what we need to do to take down the test, right? So, I mean, you know, I would joke though, particularly in spreads, if you go on the memory road, it's going to be a lot of stuff to memorize. So we
Hmm.
determined that this was indeed a credit spread because we had more money in than out.
Yeah.
And we said we could have done that even if it was missing premiums. So I have a mantra, Sam. Here's the mantra: lower, higher, longer. Lower, higher, longer. Lower strike call contracts always have greater premiums. Higher, higher strike put contracts always have greater premiums. Longer, longer term option contracts always have greater premiums. Lower, higher, longer. So if you get one of those face of death draws, because I think one of the hardest questions as it relates to options is identifying a credit or debit spread when it's missing premiums. And so we would still know that the lower strike call is going to be the dominant leg. And what I mean by that is we buy it, it's a debit spread, and if we sell it, it's a credit spread because we should know what that premium looks like. We said once we've determined that this is indeed a credit spread, now we can rock and roll. Because if it's credit, we go credit, expire, narrow. And if we go debit, we go debit, exercise, widen. So assuming we get this right, we can rock and roll.
And once
We
we know
determined
the
it was,
debit or credit, like step 8, bullish or bearish, should give
yeah,
you
you
the
could,
answer,
well, you
right?
could, yeah, you could do that. You can do it in any order you want, but you could also say, yeah, this is a bearish spread. And so I want to go down. As we said, our floor is 230, right?
Hmm.
So, 230 or lower, the contracts are going to expire. And the whole point is we're saying we want to play between those two numbers. And we said that 6 letters, that's the other way to do it. Credit has 6 letters, expire has 6 letters. I think debit, I think of myself, when you're wide like Dean, you need to exercise. I joke, Sam, that in some cultures, being wide like Dean is a sign of wealth and prosperity.
Yes.
Unfortunately, not our culture, well, right? So credit, we determined here that we indeed want the contracts to expire so that we can keep the money, right? And then
Correct.
we said the hardest concept to get in a spread, and we don't need to get it, is this idea of the premiums either widening or narrowing. And the reason we don't need to get it is because we should know credit, expire, narrow is always going together. There's no circumstance in which that will not be the correct answer.
Hmm.
And we should know that debit, exercise, widen always goes together, right? We should know that. So we said our next thing we got to be able to do on a spread is we have to determine Boom. I here remember I showed you, I don't usually show this, but I showed it to you because it's a tutoring session. And so I was just showing you this concept, the concept of widening and narrowing. And so I said, let's say we do the spread here. There's our spread. We opened it up for a net credit of 8. And then we said, let's assume Apple goes to 232. Your point, if you knew you were bearish, you would know that's good news, right? Because, you would know that 234 would be bad news. We're just doing it in this particular order. But here we're just showing you what happens if, we do that, right? Boom. Showing you what it looks like. I guess we didn't show it closed here. I think we closed at 232 and it went to 6, right? So we were showing this concept of wide or narrow. We said the gain and the loss always equals the difference in the strikes. By the way, the debit would be the opposite.
The opposite, correct.
Yeah, right. So our debit would be our loss and the difference would be our gain.
Mm-hmm.
But it would always add up to whatever these differences are. So we said our next thing we got to do is break even. You were correct. Cal and push, right? Call add to the lower. By the way, we said test taking trick. We know the break even has to be somewhere between those two numbers, right? And then your last thing is bullish or bearish. I've just illustrated the break even to you in terms of the T. Yeah, again, it was, we said one of the things on your agenda was get better at the T. The T is tried and true. What I mean by that is, no matter how complicated something gets, even on I teach Series 4, which is Richard Option Principle, I say, listen, don't try and do stuff in your head. Just open up the account and track the money in and out, and we'll be able to figure it out, right? I had one up on explication, and her test prep vendor gave her some ridiculous option position. I mean, it was just stupid. I mean, nobody would do it. And sometimes that's a struggle. You kind of go, I don't know why somebody would do this, and this was bearish, and that was our last thing that we had to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's try another one. So here, let's just go back. Boom. And again, advanced option strategies start with a basic dominant leg. In fact, sometimes we say legging into the spread. So I go long one Apple, October 235 put at 13. And that is just a basic option position. And, particularly on puts, I like to just kind of put what I'm looking at before I, jump in. This is a choice to sell the stock at the strike price. And, I like to get that going. And boom. And if this was the case, if I'm a loser, Apple is 235 or higher, and the contract expires and I lose my money.
Mm-hmm.
So my loss here is 13 points. For me to break even, I need Apple to go down 13 points.
Yeah.
The reason it's so hard as a speculator to buy an option and be right is because you have to be right about 3 things. You have to be right about direction. Here you're choosing down. You got to be right about how far down. You're saying at least 13 points. And you got to be right about timing. You're saying all this is going to happen between now and the 3rd Friday in October. Pretty difficult. If you just short the Apple stock, you only have to be right about one thing, direction down. So pretty hard. Of course, that would be a very foolish thing because, if you short the Apple stock, you'd be a dumb bear. And we keep saying, don't be a dumb bear.
Mm-hmm.
But here, this is a bearish transaction. A couple of things here. Maybe Dean doesn't have $1,300. Don't tell anybody. Second thing is, I don't like that I need 13 points of volatility. So I think what I'll do is sell the lower strike puts to help me pay for the higher strike puts.
Okay.
And by lowering my out-of-pocket cost, not testable, again, I'll tell you when it gets testable, I will reduce the amount of volatility I need, and that will be a wonderful thing. And let's say for the Apple 225 puts, All right, let's go on 220 puts. 220 puts, I can get that done at 7. And so
Okay.
test question number 1, I have done a spread.
Mm-hmm.
Spread is when you're long and short the same type of contract. And again, I like to kind of say, okay, what am I looking at? I'm looking at here an obligation to buy the stock at the strike price. So I kind of just like to, get comfortable with what I'm looking at. Boom. And as I said, the way I like to think of that is it's about the floor and the ceiling. The floor and the ceiling, right? All the action in a spread takes place between these two numbers.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole point of a spread, right? Okay, so test question number 1, as we said, is can we identify a spread? Can we identify a spread?
Yes.
And so, boom, it's not a straddle, it's not a combo, it's not a plink flamingo, it's, whatever, right? So this, what you would tell me is a spread. The next thing is really important. Is it a debit or a credit? Now, again, we said there's a couple ways to proceed on determining whether it's a debit or credit. We can fire up the T, or
Mm-hmm.
we can do it next to it, however we want to do it. And the way we do that is we're going to net the premiums, right? That's what the spread is, the difference in the premiums. So that 13 is money out, and that 7 is money in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Debit.
Yeah, this is a debit spread. And it's not a coincidence it's a debit spread because I showed you as your tutor a credit call spread. And so now I'm showing you a debit put spread. So we're looking at it as something just a little different here. And so, we have two types of spreads, right? We have debit and credit
Mm-hmm.
spreads. And we said this is really key. And we said it's really key for a lot of reasons because if we get this piece of the analysis, the paper with the
I think I
T, or,
lost you. There we go.
yeah. And then what happens, Sam, is people start rolling back. I'll be doing a tutoring session and somebody will start rolling back on something they've already answered. And I'm saying, well, no, we already dealt with that. We put that to bed. It's on to the next step, right? But
Yeah.
ultimately, yeah, that's really we said is the key to the analysis is this piece right here, where
Mm-hmm.
we have 6 out.
And then that
And
would be
so that,
your max loss in this
yeah,
case
right
for
on,
a put.
exactly right. You can rock and roll because once we get debit, we know that we want to exercise. We want to have the difference in the premiums widen. We can really get almost a 4 of the 8 or 5 of the 8,
Mm-hmm.
that alone, right? And then your point, that when you buy an option position, your worst case is the loss. So we got max gain and we've got max loss. Um, and we said you were nailed the next this part. You said correctly that whenever you buy a position, the worst case is you lose your money. By the way, it sounds like a bad thing, but is it really? I mean, what I mean by
No,
that is,
could be
I
worse.
mean, as you that right on. It's exactly the point of this spread. The point is I could have lost 13, but now I can only lose 6. I'm still a
Yes.
loser, but losing 6 is better than losing 13, right? So I got
Mm-hmm.
less money out of pocket. So I have less risk. And you were absolutely right. The max loss is the net debit. Boom. Okay. So now let's just slow down a little bit here. Okay. So we've determined this is a debit spread. We've determined that this is our max loss. We said the gain and the loss. We said all the action takes place between the strikes. As we said, you can either memorize, yuck. You can either memorize that the maximum gain in a debit spread, the maximum gain in a debit spread is the difference in the strikes less the net debit. I personally think that's a mental mess. I think there's 15 points to be made or lost.
Mhm.
We spent 6 to get rolling. That was the cost of our ticket. And so I think it's easier to say, okay, I can make 9. Now, after you get the menu done, then think about it. Don't think about it to get the menu done.
Yeah.
But what I mean by that is if somebody sticks it to me at 220 and I stick it to the next guy at 235, I'd make 15 points.
Mhm.
That would be the best case.
Yeah.
And I say, well, I spent 6, so I make 9. So
Right.
you can either memorize that the maximum gain in a debit spread is the difference in the strikes less the net debit. Or you can simply say, okay, well, there's 15 points to be made or lost. By the way, it's like learning a foreign language. The reason you're a winner is because when you did the spread, the difference was 6, and now the difference is 15. The most it could widen to would be 15 points. That's the max difference between a 220 put and a 235 put, right? We said if it widens, that's a good thing. Then the most it could widen to would be 15.
Right.
No, and by the way, we said narrow, that would be bad. The most it could narrow to would be 0. All the action takes place between the strikes. All the action takes place between the strikes. Okay, so we've got our max gain, and we said it looks like this. There's our 6 we spent. And here is our difference. Boom. We said don't hate the 8. 8 things we got to be able to do is the break even. And this is kind of cool as well. And what I mean by this is kind of cool is because before we implemented the spread, we needed 13 points of downward volatility. Our break even was 235 minus 13. But now we don't need the 13 points of downward volatility. We only need 6. And it's a lot easier for Apple to go down 6 points than it is for Apple to go down 13 points. So in a debit spread, you've lowered your out-of-pocket cost and therefore have lower risk. You've also lowered the amount of volatility upward, if it was a debit call spread, or downward debit put spread that you need. And we have memory aid devices for the break even. And remember the debit memory aid device for this one?
Push, put, subtract, lower,
Yeah,
or higher, higher, higher.
yeah, higher. Remember, lower, higher, longer, lower, higher, longer. By the way, if we are a visual person, there's no graphing on the test, but if we're a visual person, here is our 235 put. Here's our 235 put. And, boom. And here is the market price of Apple. And the whole point of a spread is we're saying that we want to play between these two prices, and then we don't want to play no more. So there's our 220 put. And we said that the break even is going to be somewhere in between these two numbers because that's what the spread is. I'm saying I want to play between 235 and 220, and then I don't want to play no more. We have established that we were out 6 points. And, pretty easy to qualify somebody who wants to buy an option position, whether it's the position we're looking at now or, some other position. If you're buying an option position, I just say, hey, Sam, is this money you can afford to lose? For everybody, that's a different number, right? I mean, I feel pretty blessed. So, I'm sure there's more people blessed than Dean, but, I kind of, feel blessed when I go into the casino and, Like, and have a good time and drop a couple $1,000 is not a big deal. But
Hmm.
wouldn't it be funny if it was like our business? Because sometimes I'll be at the roulette table and I think people are playing with money that they probably shouldn't be playing with. Anyways, if it was like our business, we'd say, hey, Sam, before you go out there on the casino floor, we'd like you to read this gambling disclosure document,
Yeah.
characteristics and risks of gambling and, how much you're willing to lose in any one bet and how much are you willing to lose in your visit this evening. And then I'd say, Sam, I got to go to my registered gambling principal and see if he'll approve you for dice because dice is a higher level of approval than cards. Or I say, man, Sam, what can I tell you? He only approved you for bingo.
Uh,
That would be kind of depressing, right? And then I joke,
yeah.
not only do they not do that, I got a cocktail server coming by saying, hey, do you take some more tequila to help you with your math and judgment skills? So a little different. So pretty easy if you want to buy these things because you boom. That's the worst case is that you spend this money. So this, speculative positions when you buy them, as I said, not a big deal. But our point is that all of the gains and losses take place between the strikes. Right. So we know the break even. So the point of the graph is just to illustrate that we know that the break even has to be somewhere between those two numbers. Now, people don't do things to break even. People do things to make money, But push stands for put, subtract from the higher.
Yes.
And remember, we have a mantra too that's pretty helpful. Lower, higher, longer, lower, higher, longer. And it's pretty helpful as well to tell us what is the dominant leg. Right. So
Higher.
here we're going to take the higher strike, 235. We're going to subtract the net premium of 6, and we get our break even of 229.
Yeah.
Boom. Yeah, by the way, it would be bad form, by the way, on the test to tell me it's like anything out of this range. So that alone on the test can get you to a 50-50
Hmm.
because you can just go to your answer set and immediately say it can't be a number that's above 235 or below 220. It's got to be a number in between. And by
Hmm.
the way, and if you get good at the T, as I mentioned, you can also kind of muck around it and get it. What I mean by that is you can kind of do process of elimination. And what I mean by that is they offer me 229 as a break even. And so now I'm just going to do trial and error until I make these columns balance. Now, remember, if this is the way you're going to proceed, then it's important for you to know the dominant leg if you're going to use the T to do the break even. So what I mean by that, there's my dominant leg, and that is my choice to sell at 235.
Hmm.
And so I plug that in as my dominant leg. And now I say, okay, well, the break even has got to be a number. Yeah, Chris. Yeah. My brother's on the property next to me. Somebody's calling me. Are you there, Chris?
Hey, yeah, I'm making a run to Walmart real quick. I don't know if you want to go or not.
Oh, okay. Well, hold on. I got to finish this tutoring session.
What time do you get?
About 10 minutes.
All right.
Okay. Bye. All right. Brother's going. We're off grid. So the Walmart is like 50 miles away in Kingman, Arizona. And so when you're
Jeez.
trying to provision things, it's not, I guess we're just Albertson a block away,
Yeah.
right? So,
Right.
all right. So, anyways, here, what I was saying is if you plug that in, then you know that this is the offset,
Hmm.
right? So if they offer me 239, 229, I put it in there. And I say, okay, would that ultimately make the columns balance? And the answer is yes, right? So if I can, buy the stock at 235, stick it to somebody at 229, I make 6, spend 6. I'm just illustrating that indeed that is the break even,
Okay.
right? And then the last thing we got to do, don't hate the 8, is we got to determine bullish or bearish.
Hmm.
And how do we do that?
The dominant or the higher
Right on.
uh,
And remember, we should be able to do that too. This
strike
is
price.
indeed a bearish spread. And we should be able is always going to have the greater premium. So we sell it,
Hmm.
it's a credit. And if we buy it, it's a debit. Again, the mantra is lower, higher, longer. And we said the reason it's important to know that this is a bullish spread, or bearish spread, excuse me, is because we need to know where we want the market price of Apple to be in relationship to
Dominant.
that break even. Right. So what I mean by that is, well, let me get out my little, when you know that here we're going to be a happy camper. And here we're going to be an unhappy camper. By the way, the worst case is 235 or higher, no intrinsic value, contract expires. All right, let's try some test questions. Let's try some test questions here. Boom, let me get rid of that. And oh, that's not what I want. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, let me go find you. There you are. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
All right, so here is a options position. An active option trader establishes the following positions. Long to alpha, April 50 calls at 2. Short to alpha, April 40 calls at 6. What is the break-even point?
Okay. So I know the max gain is going to be 8.
Well, be careful. Be
Okay.
careful. Get your T. That it's not, there's a couple ways. Let's do our menu. Let's do our menu. So first thing we're going to do, even if we can't identify it, is we're first going to do money out versus money in. By the way, it could be out or in which case it would be a spread, right? So, or excuse me, a straddle. So here is our money out. Here is our money in. And so is this a debit or a credit spread? Is this a debit?
Credit.
This is a credit spread. Once we get credit, we can rock and roll because we know expire and we know narrow. And once we get a credit, we know our max gain. Our max gain is the 4 points. And you told me the max gain. Oh, I'm sorry. You were correct. There's 2 contracts. My bad. So I apologize, Sam.
Yeah.
You were correct. This is 4 points twice, which is 8. And this loss would be 6. But break even is the question, and break even is always expressed as a per share number.
Oh, okay.
Break even is always expressed as a per share number. By the way, you should have been able to eliminate these 2 choices. You should have been able to eliminate 88 and 92 because the break even's got to be somewhere between those 2 numbers.
Yes.
Right. So we got boom, we know that it's got to be somewhere between there.
So the credit wouldn't be 8, even though there's.
Well, the credit is 8. We would do it per share. Break even's 44.
Okay.
Break even's 44 because you're going to take call, add to the lower.
Okay. So whenever I set up the T, so I had 2 6s on the credit side, and then
I think so. You should do
2 2s, and then
and then when you're all done, right? So my T would have looked like this. And then your point, you just got to remind yourself when you're done that you got 2 contracts.
okay.
So my T would have looked like this. I would add 6 here. I had 2 here. And then when I get to gain or loss is when I would multiply.
Okay. All
Right,
right.
so
See, yeah,
not
that
bad.
threw me off because I did, the 12 on the
Well, that's why
credit
we're doing
line.
tutoring sessions. That's why we're doing tutoring sessions. By the way, the answer you gave me was correct to the question that wasn't asked, but you said the gain was 8, and that's fine because if you're trying to find your bearings, right? It would be expressed as a per share number.
Okay.
The dominant leg here is my obligation to sell at 40.
Right. And then you
And
would just
so the
add the
break
credit to
even,
the lower.
yeah. And so
Yeah.
the break even is the number that makes the columns balance.
Okay.
44, because that's what break even is, same dollars out as dollars in. So
Yes.
we've got our max gain, we've got our max loss. Is it a bullish or bearish spread? Is it a bullish or bearish spread?
A credit spread is going to be bearish.
Yeah, we'll be careful. Credit call spreads are bearish, but credit put spreads are bullish. So just be careful. You're correct. It's bearish. All right, let's try another one. I think these are the hardest ones you could get. And I told you, remember the mantra? What was the mantra?
Lower, higher,
Lower,
longer.
higher, longer. Lower, higher, longer.
Strike positions.
Yeah, the break evens are boom. All right, so here I think is one of the toughest positions. We didn't get to straddles today. There we go. A client sells one December 60 put and buys one December 45 put. Lower, higher, longer.
So the 60 put is going to be the dominant one.
That's right. And
If
you
it's
got
the
your matrix
dominant,
there. When you sell puts, what are you?
you are a bull.
All right. So now you got to decide, is it a debit bull spread or a credit bull spread?
It's going to be credit.
Excellent. And I think that is the hardest part to get, is that right there.
Mm-hmm.
What's the gain and loss equal? The gain and loss equals 15. We don't know what it is because we don't know the premiums.
Premiums, yeah.
Yeah, but we do know that it adds up to 15.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's a lot of it. All right. So we made it through. Alexa, cancel. Alexa, cancel. Alexa, stop. Jeez. Okay. So you have your shared screen final booked. We didn't get to Strauss. I think Strauss are a little more straightforward
Yeah.
as well. So
I know Silo, so I'm okay with them.
So, by the way, that's fine. I don't think I have any booked behind you on your shared screen final. So add to that any other thing you want to do on your Dean to-do list, and we'll either do it before or after your shared screen final. I'll comp it, but make sure probably do it after because we don't want to, have you say you were tired because we wore you out before we did it. So,
okay.
But just add that to your list, and I will do it there. Or if you want to book a separate tuning, you can do that as well. Is your tutor? I'm pretty happy with where you were. I mean, I felt like we some things that we normally wouldn't do. If I felt like you weren't quite solid, I probably would have gone a little more gentler with you.
I feel pretty good with the options. I mean, just some of the practice questions I've been getting on the final exams are
Well, send
just
those
like,
my way. I'm more than happy to help you. I might put them on the channel, I explicate them, and you can